Welcome to our podcast. I'm delighted to be here with Belinda. Belinda will be joining us here at the Business Learning Lounge to talk about her journey. Now, Belinda is the People Director for Australia and New Zealand from Worley, and we're going to hear a bit first about her career journey and how she's got to where she is, and then I'm going to prod her with some interesting questions. Over to you, Belinda. Tell us a bit about your journey.
Thank you, Lynda. It's lovely to be here with you, having a chat like this. My journey is a little bit interesting. I guess it started probably from when I was a child. I had a long-term fascination with human behaviour. I used to get accused by my dad of being a daydreamer and off with the fairies, but what I was actually doing was looking at people and how they were interacting and, even in restaurants, are they on their first date or are they having a fight or what's their facial expression? And I was just fascinated by people and how they interact. At that early time, I didn't know it could be a career as such. So I went through my schooling and up in North Queensland where I grew up, and didn't really know what I wanted to be. What are you going to be when you grow up? And didn't really know. Still was fascinated with people, quite quiet in school because I was always just watching all the interactions. I got my first job when I left high school. I didn't go to university because I didn't really know what career. And my dad certainly was a traditionalist. You work, you earn, you provide. Yeah. And
our generation definitely
provide.
You didn't
sit at home.
Yeah.
You don't have a gap year.
Yeah.
My dad certainly didn't appreciate that. So he worked at a regional prison actually in North Queensland, and he's like, well, there's a temp job. Go and do the temp job. And it was a switchboard operator, which was an actual switchboard in a regional prison. So I was 17 and it was like connecting, drop off. Oops, lost that person. So probably not my calling. But it was interesting because that led me into a career in human behavior, really. So I ended up working there for 6 years and navigated sort of in an area called offender management, which was, if you think about a prison environment, it's like this real microcosm of society, right? It has people from all different walks of life, and in this really extreme environment of all having to live and work and try not to hurt each other, in that prison environment. And being regional, you had high security right through to open security and men and women. So I just found it was fascinating and what led them to be their offending behaviour, what happens when they, come into that environment, which has its own rules. So I had that real passion and it spiked my interest, and found that I could have a career, with this interest of how people come together and live together and work together and, all those different dynamics. So that sort of led me from there. I worked there for about 6 or 7 years, and really enjoyed it, but it was an extreme environment to work
very, very on those far edges of human behavior.
Yeah, very. And people from all different walks of life as to why they would become incarcerated.
Yeah.
And part of my role was actually writing parole reports, and so you go back to their, sentencing remarks right through to their criminal history and what led them, and make recommendations of whether to support or not parole. So had that early sort of, spark. Went, oh, actually this, there's career pathways, in this interest that I had. And, so I left there and I moved to Sydney. My friend was down there working at the Olympics, and come down here. It's a lot of fun. And it was, 2 single girls. So it was
different from prison environment.
I needed to get away from the jail. Sort of be naive again to, what happens out in the world. I went down there and I just wanted a pretty simple job. At a young age, the role in the prison had a lot of responsibilities.
Yeah.
I was only in my early 20s, so I went down there and walked into a recruitment company and I said, I just want to be a temp, work for the Olympics, sell tickets. But they said, oh, you've got some good experience, come and work for us. So I worked for a recruit company called Adecco, which was a bit of a force back then.
Yeah,
it's a big company.
Yeah, very big.
Yeah. So I worked there during the Olympics, and we did all the hired staff and paid staff, not the volunteers. And they said, oh, you're pretty good at this recruitment stuff. So yeah, they ended up offering me a role. I was moving to Perth because my sister had just had a baby over here. So they offered me a role here. So I worked there for the next few years and ended up managing a branch. And so recruitment, a lot of people in human resources.
Come in through recruitment. I started.
Yeah.
Everyone of my early jobs was definitely recruitment.
They've done their time.
Yeah.
And then sort of, Perth is obviously the resources sector.
Massive.
And massive. Went into that and went, wow, this is really interesting, this industry. It was a time when there were big $1 billion, mega projects in WA. And walked straight into it really. Very opportunistic. And
it's a very recruitment focused industry because of volume.
And there is that contingent element of our workforce here in WA. People come here for the big bucks and come and go. So that relationship, that talent was really critical. So I worked there for a while and then went in-house at Woodside and was very lucky. There was a fork in the road where, I got the opportunity to shift into more of a human resources role rather than recruitment.
A broader approach.
And had some fantastic people that taught me, I guess, the craft on the job, which I was lucky because I didn't go through that degree pathway. So I was very lucky and really loved working. At that time there was the mega projects and got my taste for projects, which I loved. Seeing how that happens over several years, these big assets that are designed and constructed and commissioned, and just loved it. So. And then
you really see something created, don't you, as in that?
Just massive. Just the size, the cost, the investment.
All the volume of people involved is huge.
I mean, the project at Woodside, 4,000 people through the gate every day. It's massive. Such a huge industry and such an interesting industry and a critical industry as well, and how we
particularly for the Australian economy. It's a massive part of our economy.
And we're so resource rich as well. There's a responsibility to it as well, which we're getting more. That's shifted since I started in the industry. The responsibility of it, the sustainability, the impact that we have in that industry has shifted quite a lot since I've been in that. So then sort of worked my way through those sort of different levels within HR and, started working with Worley, 12 years ago now. So,
isn't that long?
Well, like that, which is
because it feels like just yesterday where,
I was talking. Wow. And absolutely love it. There's no one day is the same, very dynamic business, very, with the industry and, all of the organizations that we work with in our customer base, it's just super interesting and, very dynamic. It doesn't feel like 12 years, which is great, and had a lot of change through there. Because teams as well.
Because the business has evolved quite a lot in that time. Absolutely. You've bought new businesses, you've integrated, you've done lots of M&A type of stuff as well as building big projects,
definitely.
So lots of interesting experience from your perspective.
So interesting, and always that fascination with people, how do they come together and achieve things. And that old Pac-Man picture of your cultural each strategy any day. If you don't get that culture right, you can have the best investment and the best project, particularly when you're merging organizations. It all looks good on paper, but that cultural aspect has been fascinating when you do go through those sort of merging of different organizations that, at times might appear to have the same culture or the same working practices, but when it comes to the crunch. And that's kept me very interested and challenged. So, it's gone pretty quick.
And a really dynamic industry and having to evolve massively. We talk about the VUCA world, the mining sector's been hit by that, and you've had some big significant hits. You've got to stay ahead of the green issues. You've got to stay ahead of emissions issues. You've got to be evolving your practices. You've had a lot of hits around bullying and harassment and gender issues. You've had
the industry.
Yeah, across the whole industry. It's been a challenging, probably the last 10 years, been very challenging.
Dramatic. But I actually think, some people will say, you have to be tough to work in this industry. You have to harden up and stuff. But I don't agree with that. Okay. And, just with this change in the psychological safety and, different, the more values-driven, purpose-driven organisations, I think there's some people who have been in the industry for a while that think that is maybe too soft, and I don't. We've chatted. It's the hard stuff.
Yeah, that's the hardest stuff.
What is successful in businesses. And, definitely the last 10 years has shifted. It shifted the responsibility of organisations, I think. You don't churn and burn people anymore.
Which used to be a strategy for the mining sector.
Yes.
Was churn and burn and just pay people.
Exactly. Just pay the money for their life, really.
Yeah.
And I've welcomed that, and I'm so pleased that I'm still within the workforce and in the industry when these changes are happening.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in the leadership profile that we have as well in the industry. The old, style of leader at that time in the earlier days, you had to be decisive, you had to be tough, you had to, hit the desk with your hand, your fist kind of thing.
That very top down. Yeah.
Yeah, it's changed. Not in all areas of the industry, but it certainly isn't as widely accepted as it was. And I think that, the rise of the empathetic leader, I'm loving, because we always knew it was a strength, right? That empathy and it's a strength. It's never a weakness.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased that it's happening and
and being able to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. But even, shareholder expectations of organisations
have changed,
has shifted. Yeah. I mean, we've seen some really senior people in companies be exited because of their behaviours.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. It would all be financial performance driven.
Yeah.
It's now this.
Actually, you're held to account for the culture, the behaviours, not just the strategy and the delivery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's how.
Yeah.
How are you getting there?
Yeah.
It's exciting to see that and still be within the workforce while that's happened.
Yeah. It's a big shift. I think particularly as, I do a fair amount of work in the mining sector, I think that shift has been quite dramatic even in the last 5 years.
Yes.
Because up until then, people were still nervous about going, would a project fall over if we didn't, have that very top-down approach? Would something go wrong? So there was still that nervousness, even though we were moving towards it. But there definitely seems to have been a systemic shift.
Yeah.
What do you think's been the driving force? Has it been the legislation? Has it, what's been that bigger shift that we've seen come about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the legislation always lags. It's coming in, obviously, and started to filter through safety and employment law legislation, which, certainly welcomed. Some people use it for their own advantage, but on the whole, it's sort of holding us accountable in different ways, which is good. I think the shift happened before the legislation. I think that there's different generations joining our industry and we're trying to attract them to our industry as well.
Gen Zs.
Yeah.
They're definitely changing. Yeah, they're definitely changing the way that we do things.
I do. I find myself gravitating, before Christmas we had an industry forum and sitting right there with our grads, and I just, that's where I want to be. I just find them so interesting. And I think those generational changes, from, like I mentioned, my dad, the traditionalists, you just put your head down in your work and you get on with it and you suck it up, that's not the way they want to live their lives.
No, they don't.
They don't.
And they are making different choices. Yeah. Around work-life balance, around well-being stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
They're making better choices in a lot of instances.
Because we've sort of grown in this, we have to try and create balance between our work and our life, and they have to be balanced, and they're unbalanced. I like the fact that this is just life for them, you know, and I'm going to work and I'm going to deliver some things, and it is going to be aligned to my values. And if it is aligned to my values, like there's this perception that they sort of don't want to work a 9 to 5 or are lazy, etc. I don't agree with that. I don't see that at all. I mean, sometimes some of our younger generation, particularly in the business, they're doing side work. You know, they're doing not-for-profit things. They're working,
or podcasting, or they're doing a whole lot of online stuff that's outside of the work. Yeah.
And I think they are teaching us. I think they're definitely teaching me. Just about, wait a second, you don't just have to survive your working week and get to the Friday and go, oh, you know, you can blend this, you know, and that's put us organisations on notice.
And I think that's, I think that's going to be the interesting bit, because there'll be 30% of the workforce in the next 5 years. So at the moment, they're only 5%, but that's going to shift quickly.
Absolutely.
Interesting, you know, when we think about, you know, Stephen Covey told us years ago, you need balance across your whole life, and to just think of work as a part of it is wrong. You need to have an integrated. I think that generation is much more integrated in their thinking.
They are.
We've always gone, oh, this is work and this is home, and that blended home and work we've not found that as easy. And you know, the mining sector's paid for that with labor turnover, all of that sort of stuff, because that rigidity, a lot of your fly in, fly out creates that.
Definitely.
And makes it hard for people to blend their lives.
It is. The FIFO, it's so funny because my dad worked on a gold and copper mine when I was younger, and he was 6 months away. You know,
I know. Traditionally,
heard of it.
Yeah, in the 60s, people used to go away for a year at a time. Yeah,
exactly, and maybe a couple, you know, flight home or something. You know, there is. I mean, the sector needs remote workers. They just physically need the remote workers, but that's shifted dramatically as well. You know, like a mega project was 4 weeks on, 1 week off.
Yes.
You know, that's just not the norm anymore. And
you've had to make adaptations.
I mean, 8 and 6 rosters are now becoming a little bit more acceptable. So that not sacrificing your life for your job. And that blending of it. I think our talent, I think these generations have put us on notice.
And you know, I think they're going to be even less tolerant. You know, you and I have both got Gen Zs.
Yes.
Personally.
Yes, absolutely.
And their tolerance of all of that is going to be different. So we're going to have to adapt.
But they're still ambitious. Absolutely ambitious. Sense of purpose. Want to be part of the solution. Very, very passionate about solutions to what's happening in our world. And we'll do it for free. You know, there's a lot of younger generation that will go and work for free. So the whole EVP that we have has had to shift dramatically. Legislation's followed, as it does,
and legislation will kick those that
don't.
That dig their heels in. I mean, I think it's fascinating to see some of our older generation are still really battling with the degradation of their ability to use command and control leadership. I've had a few CEOs recently say to me, I'm out of here. It's too hard. And I can see that because, you know, they've had a style that's worked for generations. And now they're being asked to change that. And that's quite hard. It's quite hard to make that shift. So now, let me just ask you a few questions from your journey. So you've had this kind of really interesting journey through your career. For you, what have been the seminal moments that you've gone, oh, that's really changed my direction, my thought process? Because you're saying, you know, the Gen Zs are interesting to you. Whereas most people, as they get older, they find them quite scary. So I'm sure there've been really seminal moments in your career where you've shifted your thinking. Give us a bit of a flavour of those important moments where you've shifted your thinking.
I'm not sure if there were sort of any big moments. I think they were probably smaller ones. That, you know, it's very easy when a new generation, if you're talking about the generations coming into the workforce, it's very easy to compare them to yourself. Go, well, that's not what my purpose is, or that's not what I value. But I've also had that happen to me when I joined the workforce. And
we've always, we've all been the younger generation.
I remember I got counselled in my first job up in North Queensland because I said cool all the time. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. And it frustrated the heck out of our finance director. So they made a complaint about me saying it, like just silly stuff like that I remember in my own early career. I don't want to be like that. Making sure that the new generation, that we embrace them. I don't know if there's been, you know, one particular change, like one dramatic change to sort of push me down a certain path of how I choose to take on a leadership role. I think people teach you, they come in and out, more people coming in and out.
They're becoming a parent.
Becoming a parent, becoming a parent, it's like your kids just put a mirror up to you all the time. Just, you know, they're holding to you to account of what they see from you and what they get from you. So I take that into my work life as well. You know, because life is life. They're both the same.
I always say I've learned more about EQ and emotional intelligence from my son than anyone else. Because they do hold that mirror up to you.
And also when you're not focused, you're not present as well. So those learnings, I guess I've adapted that into my working ways and approaches and things like that. I think I have a sense of responsibility at work in my role. I think leading others, when you choose to take on that, and you mentioned, you know, people that have been in leadership roles and they have gone through a command and control, they have to then choose, do they want to change?
Absolutely.
You know, and it's okay if they don't. And I was sort of taken on choice, if I'm going to take the responsibility and the privilege of leading others and the impact that can have on them, on their work, which is life. So you have to make that decision. I also have a sense of responsibility.
It's a hard decision sometimes, though.
It is.
Because people do have to make, you know, when you take on responsibility for leadership, it's no longer just you. You are responsible for a whole bunch of people, and your choices have such an impact on people's well-being.
And we're shifting that. It's you're responsible for their safety. And everything that entails now. So I think having that impact on someone positively or negatively, I feel a great sense of responsibility and privilege. I don't know how that came about. I think just learning from others and probably, just knowing the impact. You know, I've had terrible bosses in the past and I know how they made me feel. You know, any sort of probably female, unfortunately, in this industry has had a bit of dash of sexual harassment, you know, that you remember how that made you feel. You want to make sure that the people you're leading and have influence over are safe. So maybe it is those, but like I mentioned, there's not one that I can
it comes linked.
But a series of different experiences.
So let's talk about the gender issue because, you know, reality is you work in an industry that has traditionally been very male-dominated. I know it's shifting and I know there's a very big design. We've talked about that quite a lot over the years. But how has that, what are some of the challenges that you've faced as a female in a very gender-biased industry? How have you faced those challenges and what challenges have you faced?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think earlier on, being the HR partner to leaders, I think definitely earlier in my career, and literally all in the first half of my career, HR career, were male leaders. More recently, I've worked with female leaders, which has been fabulous. But I've actually worked with some fabulous male leaders as well. But I guess earlier on in my career, to develop that partnering approach, it's misunderstood. And it is the gender piece. And so I used to kind of jokingly say, trying to work with a male leader, they don't know how to treat me. They don't know how to develop that kind of relationship. And they're like, are you my mother? Are you my work wife? Are you my mistress? You know, like, I don't know. I don't know how
I've often heard
treat
the
you
term,
as an equal.
I've often heard the term work wife.
Yes, work
used
wife.
for HRBPs and
Which is terrible.
It's appalling.
It infuriates me. But then I also have to say, okay, well, possibly they maybe, as they've been growing up and in their careers, they haven't had a female that they believe are a peer or equal. They just, you have to help them navigate that through that. And when they sort of get it of what my motive is to partner with them and work with them to make them successful and the most effective leader that they possibly can because of the impact they're going to have on the performance of the business, but the people they need, when they get that that's my motive, that's the only motive I have, then that works better.
Not to tell them what to do or to hold them to account against legislation.
Police what you're doing. I'm here to work with you and achieve what you want to in your role as well. That takes a lot of work, and I think it's misunderstood by the leader earlier and people around them as well. They're like, well, why does he go to her? You know, what's going on there? And it's awful because you just it's just awful, but you have to navigate it. I found it's better now. I think, like I mentioned, the profile of our leaders is shifting quite a lot. There's a maturity to them.
And I think they've got used to that, and having someone who's focused on the people aspects, supporting them. I think they've got more used to that.
Now they seek it out. Definitely seek it out, have an expectation. We're not there to police them. We're not there to tell them whether they can or can't do something in their business. So that's changed. And I do see that happening across the industry a lot more. Whether that, I don't know what's driven that. I think, you know, well, there's data that's driven if you have a more diverse leadership and
we know that.
decision makers. We know the data. I don't know whether it's shareholders that have driven that. I think they sort of have with this focus on ESG.
There's a whole lot of factors, I think, that have, you know, if you look at the complexity of work life at the moment, the complexity of the economy, we know diversity helps. The gender issues have become topical globally, not just in the mining sector. We can't just keep sexually harassing women. We can't keep racially abusing people. You know, there's been a whole series of societal issues, I think, that have driven some of it. But it is interesting that you talk relatively glibly about having been sexually harassed. But our generation has, we experienced it in our younger years.
Absolutely.
And I would say to a certain extent we tolerated it because it was too difficult to fight against it.
And I also think in my younger years, I was more happy to have a seat at the table. You know, you almost apologetic
to
grateful. Got a seat at the table, but not lose it. You know,
but not piss anyone off.
I know.
Or offend anyone.
Don't be seen as difficult. I think that has shifted, and it remains in the industry in pockets. Absolutely,
of course it is.
But I'm glad that it has shifted because it's pretty awful. And I mean, earlier in my career, you know, I'd be sitting at a leadership table, the only female at the leadership table. And I remember a couple of times I had a really, a leader who was very inappropriate and just very blatantly sexist. And I had a couple of my male colleagues say, I really didn't like how he talked to you then. I really didn't like that. I was like, but you sat there and said nothing. That's not okay. Now, I think that the voice of everyone because it's the majority that don't want that behaviour. And, because we stay silent, the minority rise. So, we have found that voice of saying, hey, that isn't appropriate, and different ways of dealing with that. The inquiries across WA and Australia, in our own parliament, right through the WA Enough is Enough report, was a real sit you back on your heels. I mean, I read the WA one, I think I cried.
Yeah.
I did. I was so upset.
I've read 2 or 3 of the ones that
I feel a real responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think it really did shake the industry up. Just that shake. And I spoke to one of my colleagues who's worked on sites for years in a site administration role. And I said, is it still out there? Is it still out there? And she said, it's just gone underground.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
It's still there though.
Yeah. We do still, I still think, we've got a lot of work to do still in Australia as a whole. Globally, I would say we've still got a lot of work. I do a fair amount over in Europe. It's still there in certain industries, more so than in others. But your industry has still got some uphills to go. But at least women have got more of an opportunity to actually stand up.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your thoughts around, because, one of the things that I see is that, yes, women are starting to speak up, but then we've also got this element of almost too much drama, and that's putting people offside a little bit. What are you seeing in terms of that? But because we do need women to stand up if they're being treated badly, but not if someone looks at them sideways. Yeah. That kind of, we want that balance between the two. And sometimes I think it goes too far one way, and sometimes it goes too far the other way.
It does. Definitely experience that. And I think it's really difficult because, even when I mentioned sexual harassment earlier in my career, did I report it? Did I raise it? No. So then for me to then say, listen, we want to know about this, you should report it and we'll support you through any investigation, etc. I feel a little bit like a hypocrite, but we do want to understand it. And I think some of these inquiries, there's a majority was not reported, in organisations. So how can you address it? How can you, I do sometimes, I hear what you're saying. There are people that are sometimes using this platform incorrectly. And then that actually gets the people that may be having this experience at work sort of shy away.
The real ones, They're like, I don't want to be happened there.
Yeah. I don't really want a bar of that. I don't want to be involved in that. So the only, I guess, remedy to that is, and I've said this within our own organisation, you can't completely de-risk the business of this. The best way to do that is scrutinising and really checking every single decision you make of who you put in a leadership role, who you give accountability to lead others in your organisation.
Yeah.
So if you get that right, and it isn't about appointing all women to every leadership role. That is not the case at all. But if you get those people that have those really strong values, the empathetic leader, that can address it really quickly, you can create those cultures and those mini cultures within your organisation where it will be addressed. You've got to have all your reporting frameworks, and like we said, some people will abuse those, I think, at times. It just happens anywhere. But the who you put in a leadership role
matters.
Is the biggest impact that organisations can have. Huge.
I would agree. When I look around, we've just done a review of an organisation, and it's fascinating. One team has gone forwards massively because of a change of leadership.
Yeah.
And the exact opposite. One team has gone backwards because of a leader who's not prepared to change, And you can see it so starkly now if you do proper reviews, and you've got those systemic approaches to how you measure your leaders and check on how they're doing, then you can actually see where I think you almost don't need the recording if you're doing those regular systemic checks on your leaders, doing your 360s, doing your culture surveys or whatever tools you use to do that. Yeah. So super important, that leadership space.
Yeah.
But also there is an onus on us as women to support each other in some of this and actually have those side conversations if we think women are taking the piss.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a bit of that. And that's, I think that's important. That we support each other. Not exclusively, because we should be supporting our male leaders as well, but also helping women to find that balance between raising every tiny piece versus actually tackling the systemic bad stuff that has been going on for years.
Yeah, definitely. And my approach is, I have a strong female network, in current organisation and past, and we definitely support and talk through things and, probably challenge ourselves as well, which is good. And I really have a, great male leadership network as well.
Yeah.
And because what happens is sometimes you actually push really great male leaders out of those leadership roles because they get these unreasonable challenges at times. And I think looking at it, they can be really unreasonable. And then they have a really difficult case and it just shies them away from taking the leadership.
They get super nervous. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's especially when they do have the right values.
Yeah.
And then they've been challenged that they haven't or they've done something really unfair. It really personally affects them.
Yeah.
And we just don't want that happening, right?
Yeah.
We just want really strong leaders and empathetic leaders, and they don't
male and female. We want diversity.
Saying anything. And that's a risk with these sort of changes in legislation, that it gets to the point that some people will take advantage of them, and it'll get to the point where leaders can't even manage their teams anymore. They're like, I'm scared to say anything. But it's as constructive as it might be.
I daren't even open my mouth. Yeah. We don't want people in that position. It's interesting because we've had a 75% increase in bullying claims over the last 10 years, which, that's just bullying. So, there is going to be an element of leaders being accused of stuff. And that's hard on a person.
It's to go difficult, and it's difficult to, that reasonable management action to something that is unreasonable. But I always tell people just, if you had 10 people in the room, watching that interaction, would they think it was reasonable or not? From diverse backgrounds, would they think it's reasonable? Like
I always say, what would happen if it hit the front page of the newspaper?
Exactly. The words.
Would you be happy for that to be on the front page of the newspaper?
Exactly.
And if you wouldn't, then you shouldn't do it.
Yeah. But I also think, it's a funny time because certainly in Australia, we've got this responsibility with the energy transition. We have all these amazing resources and that the globe needs, as well as, our existing assets that we need to transition or shift. So we want a productive workforce, right? A really productive, engaged workforce and everything that comes with that. We just want to make sure these changes in legislation don't impede that. Yeah. It's a really fine balance at the time. At this time, it's really challenging.
Yeah, and I do think, we needed the legislation to help push some of the industries. But I agree with you. We don't want to use it as a big stake.
Yes.
If you get your culture and your leadership right, you shouldn't need the legislation because then you're not having to push people.
Exactly. And that's what I mean about every single choice organisations make about who do they give that responsibility. It's a really important responsibility of leading others.
Yeah.
Companies are relying on them to do that well and fairly. She can't go and police it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of your journey and your experiences, what are if you were to give some advice to younger women coming into your industry or into other industries that are very male dominated, what would be some advice that you'd give them to say, this is important if you're going into a very male dominated industry?
I think open-mindedness. I think sometimes if you join an industry, it's got a certain reputation or rightly or wrongly, just be open to getting and curious about getting to know people. What's driving it? Who are you working with? What's the environment? What's underlying, what's driving that? And I think, and I would give that advice to males and
Yeah.
I think we want people part of this industry. It's super exciting. It's super important. But it's okay to, be part of that change that we're all going through culturally, as well as like what the actual industry is doing with the energy transition. So I would give them advice to know who they are. Don't shift on your values. Even if someone, that may have authority at one moment in time tries to
hold on to your values.
Yeah, hold on to them. Be curious about people. Don't assume things about people in the industry as well. We have fantastic people, certainly in our organisation and the industry.
Yeah.
There's obviously some areas that we need to continue to focus on and address, and that will happen over time. It's definitely joining our industry. It's so exciting.
It's a very exciting time
from clever people, very solutions, very driven, purpose-driven people. It's super exciting. I mean, even though I've been with Worley for 12 years, I feel extremely energized by what we're actually delivering, but also this shift in the cultural expectations as well of our industry.
Yeah. And, really and the leadership space.
They're really challenging, but there's a sense of commitment I find as well. And like you mentioned, the VUCA world it's here. It's there. Being open to change, not fearing it. Being open to challenging different things and the way we've done things, but super exciting industry to join at the moment.
Yeah. And just an interesting time to be in leadership, because it's probably, for me, looking back, the last 5 years have seen the biggest shift in leadership.
Dramatic.
We've had inches forward over the previous years, but it's been a really dramatic shift.
Yeah.
And we're really starting to see all the stuff that, we know is important starting to actually happen in organizations, which is super exciting.
I know. And even, we're off to Brisbane with our leadership team across this region, talk about a strategy and leading into the new financial year and everything. But we give a lot of time to our own development now, more so than 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was all about the strategy and the budget and the delivery, etc. Now it's the focus on our own development, resilience, the impact that we're having on our people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's front and center on the agenda now.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Probably would have got an hour on the Friday maybe, if I was lucky. But now it's front and center.
How are we looking after ourselves?
How are we looking after ourselves, our own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
Because we need to be effective. And that just probably wasn't thought of certainly 10 years ago.
No.
It was all about, definitely command and control and power and tightly knit.
And you could yell at people when you were stressed because it's still acceptable.
Absolutely.
Whereas today it's not acceptable to actually. So, the changing requirements of leadership have changed the requirements of what you have to do for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you look at, when I did my research on resilience, there were only 5 papers globally.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Now it's a business.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but there were only 5 papers, and that was, I published 2021. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are only 5 papers globally on the impact of resilience on leadership. And yet we know, colloquially, that if someone's not resilient, they crap at leading.
Exactly.
We can see that in their actions, but it's become a very, very, very important issue that leaders have to tackle and deal with. Yeah. That's not hard and not easy.
No.
Because, if you're not doing well yourself, it's, you've actually got to go and deal with some hard stuff.
Yeah. But I think with this focus on resilience and that really leadership effectiveness and it's been fascinating because then obviously looking at the business results and knowing which teams have diversity and have high psychological safety I know where they are, and then the business results every month and every quarter. So they're all lining up.
Yeah.
So we knew that.
The lead.
But you knew that.
Yeah.
But now it's just like,
we can see
gosh,
it.
we need to.
We need to go and support that leader because there's a problem there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's good work for certainly in my profession to be doing. That's what we want to be doing. So not into the damage control. Yeah.
So great. Thank you for your time. And just to reiterate the lessons from Belinda is around, really find yourself to be curious in your role and look at what you can do and be interested in people and outcomes, wherever you choose to go, but also really look after yourself and your own leadership because that's the starting point. So thank you so much for your time. It's been great to chat.
Great to chat as always. Appreciate it. Thank you.